brief introduction to myself. My name's Lauren Griffin and I'm working within the Southampton mental health support teams and mental health and schools teams. I have been working here since January, and before I came along I was working in Hampshire CAMHS, doing a really similar role, so setting up the mental health in schools teams over in Hampshire. And I'm a CBT therapist by background and also a mental health nurse. So that's a little bit about me, just for context. Talking of context, there's a bit more here, just thinking about the mental health in schools teams. So the government back in 2017 kind of really, funnily enough, cottoned on to the idea that mental health is a real priority for our young people finally, which was a huge kind of relief, I suppose. And what they decided to do is invest a lot of money into creating mental health in schools teams. So the idea was that we would roll those out across the whole of the country, and that we would have between 1/5 and 1/4 by the end of 2023. In Southampton City, we were really lucky and really fortunate. So in the second waves, they've called them, that came out, we were a part of that bid, and we had 2 teams that started in the city. That was at the beginning of last year. So we really were lucky to get those, and actually we managed to be successful again and get another 2 teams which have just started in January. So we now have 4 mental health in schools teams across Southampton City. Just to give you an idea, that works out pretty much at 90% of schools in Southampton are covered by our mental health in schools teams. 10% additional counts for schools that maybe didn't sign up, and we're working with some schools that might be wanting to kind of sign up in the coming years as well. So we are incredibly lucky, because the idea was that we would have about 25% coverage across the whole of the country, and we've got 90% in Southampton. So I'm very pleased to tell you that.
Yeah,
that's
it's
a little
fantastic,
bit,
isn't it?
I know, we are just so lucky. It's amazing. So I just wanted to tell you a bit about what the aims are of the mental health in schools team. So there's a couple of kind of main aims. The first one is around delivering evidence-based intervention for mild to moderate mental health issues, and that's predominantly anxiety disorders and depression is our kind of bread and butter of the team and what we're working with. I don't know if evidence-based interventions is something that you've come across as a terminology. It's about saying that what we're providing the young people, so the interventions we're doing with the young people, they've been really rigorously tested. So they're looking at how effective they are, and all the interventions that we're providing have gone through really rigorous testing. So we know that the evidence is saying scientifically it is really effective, and that's why we tend to stay with a really kind of a model which stays exactly the same, because we know that that's what works best. So that's one of our main aims, to provide that for our children and young people. That needs to be alongside lots of other provision that's already in place. So we know that we've got counselling service, ed psychs and school nurses that do an absolutely phenomenal job in the schools, and it's really important that we're clear that we're an additional. So we're not we're not kind of losing our support. It's about adding. So that's one area, and then the other is about supporting a senior mental health lead to introduce a whole school approach. Now, the whole school approach is something that was developed with a recognition that perhaps wellbeing isn't always on the priority within schools. There are lots of other conflicting things that need to be kind of recognised, but the whole school approach is saying that the mental health needs to be absolutely at the forefront of all of our schools' minds, and that without wellbeing in our teachers, without good wellbeing in our students, then the schools aren't going to be able to flourish as effectively, and young people aren't going to be able to have the best outcomes, really. So that's a little bit about the whole school approach. Each school that signs up to our mental health in schools team had to provide a senior mental health lead, and what we were really clear on is that senior mental health lead needed to be somebody within the senior leadership team, and that was because we felt that this needs to be about the top-down approach, and that wellbeing needs to be everybody's business. So that was some of the rationale there, and also we really hope that senior mental health leads, being in a senior position already, would be able to promote change as well.
That's really good, really positive.
It does seem to have worked as well over the last year. We have seen really significant change in the way that our mental health leads are kind of thinking about wellbeing within the schools, which is really helpful. So just a brief bit about our structure. So there's 3 senior leads, and so there's myself, Mary Chisholm and Kate Bishop. We all work together to kind of lead the team and make sure that we're being really clinically effective. We've got CBT therapists, and I'll talk a little bit about what CBT is further on in the slides. We've got supervisors that make sure that the clinical work that our trainees are doing is really effective, which is brilliant. And then we've got 16 EMHPs, which 8 of which started their course at the beginning of last year. They haven't finished their training, unfortunately, due to COVID. So they're still kind of plodding through their training and so nearly there. And then we've got 8 other education mental health practitioners who started in January, so very new, just passed their exams, and they're just ready to go out and start working with young people in our schools, which is super exciting. They've had 3 months of university and I think they're ready to get out there now. Bless them. I know, they spent so much time because they've been at home. It's not like they've been learning in the classroom or anything. It's just, yeah.
Really hard, isn't it?
Bless them. So that's a little bit of our team structure. It is quite a big team. What we need to be careful about is just not negating from how much need there is out there in the city. So we've got 4 kind of MHSTs now, and each one is designed to support 8,000 children. So it's a lot.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
That's a lot.
I mean, it is a lot. You're right. It is a lot of young people, but not all young people need support from us. So that's the positive and the benefit. And the idea is that if we're doing, so if we're supporting this whole school approach, that we'll be meeting the needs of children much sooner, so that they won't need these one-to-one interventions. That actually the schools are doing a cracking job of really supporting wellbeing before it's even an issue, which is what we're all kind of working towards.
Yeah, that's really good.
So that's a little bit about our structure. So our trainee EMHPs, I've said it a little bit actually. So they're at Southampton University. The training year is, it's supposed to be a training year, but obviously having cases over the last year has been quite tricky. So lots of our team are still in that process of training. It's about kind of really, some of them are starting from day dot, so they haven't had experience in therapeutic interventions, but they've got bags of experience perhaps in teaching or counselling, those sorts of things. So this is a new journey for a lot of our trainees, and they'll be starting it, well, they started it really 3 months ago, and so their knowledge base will grow throughout the year, and by the end of by this time next year they'll be really efficient mental health practitioners, which is great. So there's something about their training as well. So half of it is about that one-to-one support that we really recognise is necessary for young people early on, and then also kind of 3 modules around the whole school approach. So they're slightly different, which I think adds value and strength to the trainees that we'll have when they're qualified. So I'm hoping that this video is going to work. Jill, I don't know if you've seen this. Let's see.
I'm not sure if I have.
Oh, should have known, shouldn't I? Ooh, you know what? Oh, might be lucky. Come on, laptop.
Thinking about it.
Here we go. It's never been used so much as the last year.
Yeah.
Hi there,
Can you hear it okay?
to the Education Mental Health Practitioner Programme. This video was made by the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families.
Oh, I didn't like that, didn't it? One more time.
Hi there, and welcome to the Education Mental Health Practitioner Programme. This video was made by the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families.
Children and young people spend a large amount of time at school. It is understood that at least 3 students in every classroom are struggling with mental health problems. This affects students' learning.
But with growing demand on mental health services, children and young people and their families often don't have access to the mental health support that they need. It was time for things to change.
Training for education mental health practitioners, otherwise known as EMHPs, began in January 2019. As this is quite new, you may not have heard what an EMHP is.
EMHPs aim to improve access to psychological therapies for children, young people and their families. EMHPs do this by using evidence-based principles to provide low-intensity interventions for children and young people who are experiencing anxiety, low mood or behavioural difficulties.
EMHPs may also run groups or workshops in educational settings for children and young people, as well as for parents, carers and school staff.
Importantly, EMHPs work together with schools. They work in primary schools, secondary schools and colleges to support children, young people and their families. They will also work with school staff to improve wellbeing across the school as a whole.
EMHPs use a person-centred approach which puts the young person at the heart of the support that they receive. They will also help create a supportive network around the young person to maintain future wellbeing.
To explain this better, let's hear about Jamie's story. Jamie is 13 and loves school, but over the last few weeks, his mum and his teachers have noticed that he isn't concentrating as well as he usually does, and doesn't seem to hang out with his friends as much. Jamie felt like he had a big black cloud hanging over his head.
His school teacher explained that if he wanted to, he could chat to Sophia, the school's new EMHP.
Jamie met with Sophia for the first time at school to talk about how he was feeling. Sophia helped explain what low mood was, and they discussed goals that Jamie would like to achieve. Throughout their sessions, Jamie and Sophia decided to look at a self-help guide for low mood. Sophia then worked together with Jamie and his mum to put into practice some of the ideas they talked about.
Jamie was able to track his progress during sessions by filling in questionnaires on Sophia's laptop using an online system called Pod.
Over the weeks, Jamie could see his progress using the graphs generated by Pod. Jamie really liked this as he could look at his progress in relation to the goals that he had set.
Jamie really enjoyed this way of working as he felt that he was listened to and that his views counted. It gave him practical ways to improve his own well-being and to reach the goals that he cared about. He could also use the ideas that he discussed with Sophia after their sessions were finished and share what he learned with his friends.
EMHPs work using evidence-based principles to guide a young person to achieve their own goals. What's great about EMHPs is they are based in schools and colleges, so are more accessible to young people and their families. What's different about the EMHP approach is that they put the young person at the centre of what they do. They focus on empowering the young person and their family to look after their mental health in very practical ways, just as they might look after their physical health. This helps fight stigma and supports the young person to develop positive mental health strategies for their future.
Okay, so that summarises it so much better than I could have done.
That's really good. That's really
It's
interesting.
such a helpful video. It's done by Anna Freud, who are real leading a real leading organisation in the whole school approach across the country. So they're brilliant. The only thing I would say is that in that video it does talk about Pod, which is their way of recording. In Southampton we've got a slightly different way of doing that. It's just a different program, Silver Cloud, but that's the only difference. So it summarises it, I think, beautifully.
It does. I've learned a lot actually, just from seeing.
No, I'm really pleased. It does help to summarise it well, because I think it can be quite complicated sometimes to really kind of understand what professionals are doing in schools and what they're doing to support young people's mental health. So hopefully that summarises it well. And there's a little bit here as well. So we're really lucky to have some CBT trainees and some CBT therapists on our team too, and they work with they work slightly longer, so they have a little bit more kind of one-to-one time with young people, so they tend to work between 12 and 16 sessions, whereas the EMHPs tend to work, I would say, on average between 7 and 8 sessions. So our CBT therapists work for longer, and they do a little bit more, I guess they just work with kind of more complex young people. So we're really lucky to have them on board, and they're kind of much more specific in the disorders that they work with. So that's great. We're really lucky to have them. So the whole school approach, this is the kind of what would I call it? Sort of a diagram, I suppose, that really summarises all of the aspects of the whole school approach. So this is what we as a team are supporting the mental health leads within your children's schools to do. So it talks about curriculum and teaching and learning. We're really working with the schools to think about how do they include wellbeing in their PSHE lessons, how do we normalise and destigmatise mental health difficulties, and how do we provide psychoeducation for young people on how to identify difficulties in themselves so that they can seek support really early on, because we know that that's the key, and when it comes to mental health difficulties, is the earlier the intervention the better. There's a really key part about enabling student voice as well, which we're really excited about. So it's about making sure that we're speaking to our young people about what it is that they truly want from us as a service to support the mental health needs in their school. We've recently employed a participation worker who actually started this morning. So very, very early days, but their key role will be around making sure that student voice is heard and it is really impacting on what we're doing and how we're providing our service. So that's great. And we also hope it would really promote and support our student voice to be able to become more and more involved as well. So there's that, thinking about staff development as well, and some of that is around psychoeducation, so helping staff to identify mental health needs in the students that they work with, thinking about how they can support children in the classroom that have mental health difficulties as well, and how they have those conversations around mental health. Both with young people and parents actually as well, and also thinking about their own well-being. We know that that teachers work incredibly hard, and if teachers are going to be able to support well-being in their students, then they really need to have good well-being themselves. So that's something for us to hold in mind as well. Something about identifying need and monitoring impact, and that's talking about making sure that the work that we do with the young people in our city is really effective and that we're proving that from a scientific approach. So we collect lots of data which evidences that what we're doing is making a difference. And when it's identifying that we're not making a difference, because there are aspects, I'm sure, where we can be having better outcomes, then we can target that to make sure it's improved. Working with parents and carers, you guys will absolutely be the experts in that. So it's absolutely making sure that parents feel supported to be able to support their children and young people with mental health difficulties. Again, it's about increasing knowledge and understanding around mental health and providing workshops, providing kind of potentially targeted support. So a lot of the support we provide for primary age children is generally speaking working with parents, because we know that's what's most effective. So that's an important one there, and we've been so lucky to have Jill come along to lots of our board meetings and things to really kind of bring her voice and parent voice along too, so that's great.
You can pay later.
Yeah, targeted support as well, making sure that the referrals are appropriate and that we're not trying to support young people that don't meet the needs that we provide and that we target. That feels really important to us. And overall, just this sense of an ethos and environment that we're really valuing kind of diversity, thinking about the fact that mental health doesn't discriminate. It can happen to any of us, and we really need to be supporting all young people, children, their families and teachers around making sure that environment feels safe for them. And in the middle is just thinking about leadership and management. So it goes back to that idea of the mental health lead being the person that kind of is senior leadership within this. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour of our whole school approach, all of the things we're doing. To give you a bit of a flavour of what that actually looks like, I know that Reminds have been uploading the newsletters that we're producing. They're being produced for young people, families and for teachers as well, so they're separate ones. We're also providing workshops for young people. We're thinking about groups and trying to roll those out, and thinking about workshops for parents as well. So there's lots of kind of planning. Obviously, we're still in our infancy really as a team, so we're really working on those. So if you have any thoughts about what might be particularly helpful, it'd be great if you could kind of let me know, or perhaps let Reminds know, and they can pass it on to me. That would be really valuable. So that's something about the school approach. This is specific around what difficulties the MHST target. I won't go through them all, but generally speaking, they're divided up into kind of low mood and depression and anxiety disorders. The only kind of outlying difficulty I would say on there is around behavioural difficulties. I've actually put under 8, but we've increased that now, so it's actually under 11. So if your child has got behavioural difficulties, then we can provide incredible years principles to you as a parent. It's parent-led work, just to support you with children that maybe their behaviour is more challenging than what we would expect to see. Then we would kind of come in and work with you to support that. So that's the only one that's slightly different. Other than that, we've got anxiety disorders and depression.
Wow, that's a lot. It covers more than I realised actually.
Yeah, it's really it's really helpful, and I think we're really passionate about shouting really loudly about what we can do, because it's really important that young people get our support. The next slide talks about kind of exclusion criteria, and I guess we are really passionate about making sure we can support young people, but we're also really passionate about making sure that we're not accepting young people into our service that it just wouldn't meet their needs, or it wouldn't be supportive or effective. So some of these are here. So the MHST exclusion criteria would be kind of complex trauma, because we don't have a good evidence base. We don't know that CBT is effective for complex trauma. Eating disorders is very much the same. It's much more of a specialist piece of work, and we're really lucky to have an eating disorders service as part of CAMHS as well already. Thinking about historical or current experience of abuse or violence. And our rationale around that is because a lot of the work we do is challenging thoughts, and if a child is in threat and they're experiencing anxiety, then actually we would imagine and we would expect that they're experiencing anxiety, and that would be really usual for the context. Actually, it would be a really normal emotional response to feel anxious if you had an experience of abuse or violence, and that's what the anxiety was focused on. So it's just about being really clear that it would be really inappropriate for us as a service to then come in and challenge thoughts or feelings around that situation. Bereavement is another one. It's not a mental health need, it's not a mental health difficulty, it's a process. And Simon Says, so the local charity that do that, and I just think they're brilliant. So they kind of really take a lead in that, and we don't. Thinking about active, enduring and significant self-harm or suicidal ideation. So we're a team that are very early intervention, and young people that might be engaging in those sorts of behaviours or having those sorts of suicidal thoughts, you know, that would suggest that there's much more severe, and therefore they would need to have other support that would kind of you know, extend past what our team could do. And then we have attachment disorders as well. So young people with attachment difficulties, I should say, really. You know, CBT hasn't got a role for the treatment of kind of attachment difficulties. So it's just another thing to hold in mind there. So there's a bit there about exclusion criteria. I hope that's felt clear.
Can I ask, big issues with our families and sort of ARFID within sort of the eating disorders, and we know there's CAMHS aren't, you know, commissioned to support with that, and we get time and time again sort of those issues, and we don't quite know where to send people or where to go for, as reminders. I don't know whether that's
really
anything you cover.
Really good point. I think it's about the context, and I know that's not particularly helpful because that doesn't give you a yes or a no or a blanket. I think when we're thinking about ARFID, sometimes there is a role for low intervention CBT if it's very early on, and that could be helpful. So I wouldn't outrightly exclude that. I'd also be thinking about heading back to the eating disorders team and just thinking about where they're at in terms of recognising ARFID, because I know there have been some significant changes across the country. So it might be something to just speed up feedback with them. Sorry, there's poor choice of words perhaps. It might be interesting to just feed that back to them and just see where they're at with that.
Yeah.
Know whether that might have made some shifts.
We're working on it. We're trying to get an advice clinic around it. So that's sort of on our agenda at the moment. But yeah, it's a bit of a work in progress.
And maybe that's something for us to kind of think about elsewhere, actually, then, Jill, about how we might fit with that, because it could be something about kind of educating teachers in it, all that sort of stuff, which we, you know, that would fit under the whole school approach. So there's aspects, isn't there?
That could be really interesting. Yeah, we'd be interested in pursuing that, right? Thank you.
So hopefully that feels clear in terms of exclusion criteria. What we do is targeted support. So this is just a little bit more about what we do offer. So journey through our service, young people are referred into our service, and we complete a triage. We're likely to contact families or young people to hear a little bit more about their story very briefly, to make sure that they do seem like they've kind of meet the needs of their needs we can meet. And then we have an assessment with the young person if we think it's appropriate. So that tends to happen at school. That's the aim, because it makes it so much more accessible for young people. We also do it within NHS sites. So we're based at the Adelaide Healthcare Centre. So it's over at the Horizon Centre. We can offer sessions, and we're also offering quite a few sessions online as well at the moment. So we're trying to be flexible and adaptable around COVID and the restrictions, but that's where we're at the moment. So for primary age children, we provide short pieces of evidence-based interventions, and that is for the parent. So it's our clinicians and a parent work through a process together so that the parent can become really skilled in managing the child's anxiety. And that's because a lot of the work that we predominantly do with anxiety, targeting anxiety, is thinking about anxious thoughts, anxious feelings and anxious behaviours, and how they all interlink. Children that are, I would say, probably under 9 or 10 really can find that really difficult, and actually we find that therefore CBT directly with young people isn't as effective. And the research does show that, you know, if you're trying to target anxiety by working with a parent, then that's the best way. We also work with children, as I explained before, who are struggling to manage their behaviours as well, and that's parent led. So generally speaking, any interventions, I would say predominantly the interventions that we're providing for primary age children are for the parents and their parent-led pieces of work. We do work one-to-one with young people where it's appropriate. It's just we have to hold in mind that the evidence base is saying it's most effective to really kind of skill that parent up to become a bit of a co-therapist. And there's real value in that, because we're teaching these skills to parents for for life. They've got them then. You know, many parents have more than one child, and they can apply those skills to other children as well. And it does mean that, you know, anxiety waxes and wanes, and there are times when children really flourish, and then they might have an experience which maybe would be more anxiety provoking for them, and the parents have got those skills, whereas we wouldn't necessarily be around as clinicians at that point. So it's got some real values to it.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I think it's really enabling for parents as well to know, you know, this is what I can do, this is what, you know, it's empowering, this is what I can do.
That's what we find most with our families. They want those strategies and those skills. And I know Nadine from your team has done some really good sessions, you know, with practical skills that parents can use, and they've been really popular.
Yeah, Nadine is brilliant. In fact, you know, I'm biased, but our whole team, we've got some absolutely incredible staff, and we're incredibly lucky. And I think it is about sort of working alongside, so parents can go away, implement something, trial something out, and then come back. And the idea is that they've got that support to think things through about, like, actually what worked really well in that, or what didn't work so well, and how do I apply this technique? And you've got that kind of constant support through those sessions, and it's a variety of face-to-face sessions, and then telephone calls as well. So it's really kind of taking you so that when you've completed that piece of work, you feel really confident in supporting that child to get through that, and, you know, whatever it is that they're anxious about.
Yes.
So for children age above 11, we do targeted treatments as one-to-one. I would say the sessions last on average between about 8 sessions, and they're very structured, and they're very much based on the evidence base. So what the evidence says is the most effective. Which is brilliant. So we do a range of different things in there, and I'll talk about that a little bit further on. So some of this is just about answering your questions that you sent, which came from families. So hopefully it will kind of make sure it all becomes clearer. So one of the questions was around, like, what would happen if you complete that piece of work and then actually the needs are still there, the child's still struggling, and we'd have a review at that point, and we'd say, well, is it because we need to offer another intervention in our service? If so, let's make sure that happens. Or is it actually the needs of this child are quite a lot more than this early intervention stuff? Let's refer on, and we think with the family and the young person about what next, what would be most helpful, and support them through that journey. So that's a little bit there. So we would potentially offer more sessions if following the kind of dose, if you like, of intervention didn't kind of change or make change, and then we would kind of think about referring on if necessary.
Are you able to refer on to CAMHS yourselves, sort of as part of that, if you think it's appropriate?
Yes, we are able to. It doesn't make any kind of a shift in terms of how long the waiting lists are, but we are able to support that, because the more details that any service has over a young person and their needs is always going to be beneficial. So we can support that process if it's necessary. So referrals are received from our mental health lead. So there's a mental health lead in each school. They assess the needs of the school, and they consider the difficulties of young people, and then they would put them forward to us, and then we would think about whether they would fit with us and accept from there. There was also a question around kind of how do we support children, really? Is it on a needs based, or, you know, what does it look like? And we offer our time to our schools based on a school pupil premium. So if a school has particularly high mental health needs, then we might say, yeah, we can offer you, you know, a day a week, 2 days a week within your school, where we will be working with targeted support and whole school approach. And then they, from that amount of time, can then make those decisions around who needs support. And I think that's why, you know, it's really, really important that your school mental health lead is aware of your child's difficulties. And that might not be about approaching the school mental health lead directly. If you've got a really good link with your child's tutor, you know, making sure that they're feeding that information up, and that you are saying to them, you know, do you think that the mental health and schools team would be appropriate? Those sorts of conversations feel really important.
Is there a way of finding out who the mental health leads are for each school?
Oh, that's a good question. I could possibly send you that, Jill. I mean, I would hope that as time goes on and as we establish, that's going to become more and more obvious. But I'm happy to send you a list of what we've got in terms of information of mental health leads, if that would be helpful. So that
I think sometimes it's just really good to know who to go to in a school.
Oh, totally agree.
No, that would be really useful. Thank you.
That's absolutely fine. So another thing, lots of questions are around parental involvement, which I wasn't surprised to see for this talk. So we talked about before about how predominantly the work for primary age children is about working with those parents. which is brilliant. It means there's lots of parental involvement, and that means that once our intervention is done, all of those skills are with you guys as parents, and that's got so much value to it. In terms of the older children, we work really closely with young people to make sure that they understand the pros and the cons of information sharing with family. Some young people really don't want their information to be shared with their parents or their family, and we need to be respecting that as long as there isn't kind of any concerns around the child's safety. So we do make sure that we're really balanced in explaining about the usefulness of information sharing. We do know that when family and parents are involved in supporting the intervention, then it's often much more effective. You know, that child's got additional support to do the things that are expected of them within therapy, and it means that the parents are able to, again, ongoing kind of remind them of those skills that they've learned, which does really help. So we leave it up to the child to decide how little or how much they would like the family members to be involved in their treatment, and we're really adaptable. So if children want their parents in all the time in all of the sessions, then that's what happens, and if they don't want them in them at all, then they're not included either. So we try to really make sure that we're really hearing what the young person needs. The caveat around this would always be that if a child is at risk or we're concerned about their safety, then children are really aware right from the beginning of our interventions that we would have to break confidentiality, and we would have to share information around that for the purposes of risk management.
Yeah, okay.
And yeah, so young people, I should put really rather than children there, but young people who have capacity, so they're able to make really informed decisions and weigh up whether or not they want our service, they can have that without parental permission, and that tends to be from age 14 up. Anecdotally, we've had a couple of 13-year-olds that have really kind of had their decision making, and they've been really clear they don't want their parents to know, but it's very, very few and far between. Okay. So I hope I've made that clear, Jill.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah, it's really good.
And just another further points, there was questions around waiting lists and things. So we aim to complete an assessment within 4 weeks of them being accepted by our triage team. That's happening regularly. I think it probably happens within the next, well, definitely you receive the phone call, generally speaking, within the first week to arrange your appointment. And once that initial assessment happens, we always try to make sure that there's continuity. So whoever completes that assessment would then carry on and do that piece of work for the young person. You know, we really recognise that it's really unhelpful to be speaking to so many different people and telling your story again and again. So that's
good.
Generally
speaking, really good.
Yeah, generally speaking, that is happening as well. There's a couple of cases where we might do an assessment and it might be an intervention that maybe there's another member of our team that would be better fit to do that, and obviously in those cases we need to think about what's most effective for the child and what their needs are, but generally speaking it's the same. And once they complete that assessment, then the information is given back to their so the trainee would bring that information back to their supervisor, have a discussion, agree that treatment would be appropriate, and then offer the treatment. So it's really quite a quick turnaround at the moment, which we're really thrilled about, because we know that early intervention is really, really important. So it's just a little bit of information for you there.
That's fantastic.
And I don't know how much I'll go into this. I mean, this was just a little bit more about what we do and the work that we do with young people in one-to-one sessions. So the model that you'll see in the middle is something called a formulation, and that essentially means this is what we understand is what's going on, and we create these with children and young people within our sessions, and then we base all of our work off of it. So this is like the initial part of understanding, and I just thought I would share it with you because it's really helpful. So it really is the core of CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, and what it says is that you can apply this model to any situation. So I've come up with a situation as an example. So for this situation, this is I don't know, let's say a child sat in the classroom and she's just got her essay back and she's not done as well as she thought. Maybe she's kind of just scraped a pass, but really, you know, the thoughts that might come up for her are, you know, I'm going to fail all of my exams because I didn't do as well in this one. I'm going to let everyone down. She might think I'm not good enough. She might think, you know, what if I fail my exams and then I can't get into college? She might think, what if thoughts kind of going through her mind. That leads to feelings of worry and anxiety and perhaps embarrassment about not doing as well, feeling worried about having to tell her parents or friends what marks she got. And then that might mean that when she feels those feelings, what she does in response is she seeks reassurance from her mum. She avoids completing further coursework because she thinks, I can't bear the thought of not doing very well again. Or alternatively, she might find that she works really hard beyond all hours and really exhausts herself trying to do her absolute best because she really wants to get it just perfect. And those thoughts and those feelings really do lead to kind of physical sensations that you may well hear your child talking about. So tummy ache, breathlessness is just some examples there, but there could be a whole host of kind of physical sensations that young people experience. So this model suggests that thoughts, feelings, behaviours and physical sensations all interact with one another, hence all of the arrows. We also call it a hot cross bun as well. I don't know if you can notice a hot cross bun in it. But it says, CBT says that really what we need to be doing to be supporting children with anxiety is targeting these thoughts, because they're often what sets off this spiral, and then that kind of maintains the problem. So we support young people to challenge their thoughts. Sometimes that's about thinking about different arguments, so thinking about for and against. So for this young person, when she's saying I'm going to fail all of my exams, we could be having those conversations with her. Well, what evidence have we got for that? What evidence have we got against that? How do we rebalance that thought? And we also do graded exposure. So we expose young people to scary things. So that wouldn't be so appropriate for this situation, but perhaps if a child thought when she saw a dog was, oh my God, it's going to bite my head off and I'm going to die and it's going to kill me, then we would be doing work with them to challenge those thoughts, but also think about exposing them to dogs. So working really carefully with them so that they could build up really a tolerance around being around dogs, and that would help them to learn that they are safe around them, for example. So there's this kind of model is really the starting point for the majority of the work that we're doing with our young people in one-to-one support.
Really good. I really like that.
It works brilliantly. I use it all the time myself in so many situations. You can apply it to anything. It's not just for children and young people, it's for parents too. It's great. You can really work out what's going on, and often our thoughts do become our thoughts can become anxious, and it is really helpful that we check in with them and we think about, how realistic is that thought, or how much is that thought is really getting in the way of me feeling a certain way. And then all the way around the outside is just other things that are really important to the work we do. So collaboration is absolutely the key, making sure that young people really understand what we're talking about. The evidence-based bit I've harped on about enough. I think it's about saying what we're doing is evidence, is kind of the research is saying it's effective. You've got experiments there, so you would be working with a child to trial and error and work together, kind of like mini scientists, to think about those thoughts and how realistic they are. There is an expectation around home tasks. That might be filling in thought diaries. It might be doing an experiment to see what happens, to test something out, and that kind of links with that idea of real curiosity. So being curious together to work out what's going on. And also monitoring as well. So that's talking similarly to the video where they were talking about how the young person kind of wrote down the scores of how he was feeling, and he measured the scores. That's what we'd be doing in sessions too. So that's just such a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavour of how our thoughts, feelings and behaviours all interact. There's just one more here from more of a low mood perspective actually. So this might be a situation where they're sat in the lunch hall on their own perhaps, because there's no children around and they haven't kind of approached the child, and maybe the child might think nobody likes me, I'm boring, I'm worthless, they might think I'm not fun to be around, and then the feelings would link to kind of feeling sad and worthless, and of course that that might well lead them to avoid meeting friends and just think what's the point, so they don't go. They might stay in their bedroom and withdraw. And the physical sensations, they might feel quite numb, they might have headaches, they might feel tired. And I think the key here is that the thought is what's kind of maintaining this problem. So in that situation, the child was sat in the lunch hall on their own, and actually that was the thought that they initially had, was nobody likes me, whereas the thought could be, my mates have all still stayed in, my teachers made my mates stay in the classroom for longer, so they haven't made it there yet to meet me. Or it could be, my mates aren't in today, they're not around, those sorts of things. And of course, if that thought is different, that would make such a significant difference in terms of the feelings and the behaviours that are playing out. So it's about that thought being really kind of significant. Often in anxiety and depression, that's what keeps the problem going.
Yeah, no, that's interesting as well. I'm thinking, I'm mulling it all over now. I'm thinking all about it. Yeah.
It's such, and there are so many worksheets and things on this. It's really helpful, and I think, you know, it helps us to understand when there's kind of errors in thinking, if you like. So it might be that your child is struggling with catastrophizing. So you might say, oh, we're going to go, you might say, oh, we're going to go to, oh God, I don't know, I've got off the top of my head, going to go to the zoo at the weekend. And perhaps that child might kind of catastrophize and think, but I'm not going to know anyone there, and I don't know where I'm going, and actually, you know, what if I get lost? I'm probably going to get lost, and all of those thoughts kind of really escalate. And actually, you know, as a parent, I guess we're thinking, oh yeah, we're going to take our children to the zoo and they're going to love it, and so we're expecting, our thoughts are, you know, my child's going to be really grateful that they're going to be taken to the zoo. So you can see how this doesn't just work for young people, but it also works really for all of our thoughts and how they interact with one another. Yeah, you could talk about it for hours and hours.
It ties in really nicely on the course that we run, the NAP course. We do, in fact, next week is a whole session on unhelpful thinking styles and how to challenge them.
So you'll be expert.
Yeah,
so
no, not at all.
No, I'm sure you are. I mean, this is what we're talking about with young people. It's helping them to understand, like, when are you catastrophizing? Is there black and white thinking going on here that's linked to anxiety? You know, are these thoughts really helpful? Are they unhelpful in terms of what's happening?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of stuff that we do with young people. And that tends to be more for anxiety. For low mood, we tend to think about activity and what we're doing. So the work we do for young people with depression is we may well do some thinking about thoughts and challenging thoughts, but also what we do is we recognize that young people, when they feel low, they tend to withdraw, they tend to not involve themselves in activity, and what that does is it disables them from having any positive time, which then would boost their mood. So what depression does is it tells you to hide away, and actually what that's doing is keeping the depression going. So we do quite a lot of work with young people about activities and thinking, well, how do we add value to your life? How do we make sure that the activities that you're doing are meaningful and that they're not all negative things? Because there are aspects of all of our lives that we have to do in terms of activity, which does kind of drain your battery. You know, we talk about supporting young people to think, well, what's really important to you? What are you passionate about? How can we work together to make sure that there's aspects in your life that are really boosting your battery and that they're making you feel much better? And sometimes that's about getting a sense of achievement. Sometimes that's a sense of getting enjoyment. Often it's about getting a sense of closeness to others as well. Young people often feel isolated when they feel low. So we've got lots of strategies. This is such a flavour. I'm kind of throwing them out there. I'm more than happy to come back at any point as well and think about different kind of strategies for different things. I'm just mindful that this is kind of really a bit of an intro to the MHST and what we do. But, you know,
no, absolutely. I would definitely love to have you back to talk about that. It's really interesting, really useful. Thank you.
That's good. And there's just some Q&A. I'll come off of this so that I can come off the share. There we go. That's better. So I don't know if you've got any questions off of at the back of that, and Jill. Obviously, people will be watching this kind of later on. So if anybody has got any questions, please contact me through Jill. I'm more than happy to kind of ask away. I hope I've summarised everything. It felt like a lot.
You have. I think it's been really good. It's certainly lots to think about, and just so useful to have a better understanding of how it's going to work, and especially when it's in sort of 90% of schools. Do you have a list yet of which schools have signed up?
Yeah,
we can have at some point.
Absolutely. Yep, I shall send that your way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One question I had was you talked about the mental health lead is the person in the school, is the person that refers into the service. What if there was a disagreement that the mental health lead didn't think that it was right to refer the young person, but the young person and the family did?
Oh, it's a good question. I would say there's a disagreement over whether or not you think that the young person should be. So if you've got a child and you think that they need our service and the mental health lead didn't, I'd be really curious with the mental health lead about rationale. So why do they think that? Because it might be that there's a really clear explanation around.
I'm thinking more like around a lot of our children and young people really mask at school. So therefore the school might not see the anxieties that the parents seeing before the child comes into school.
Yeah, we hear that a lot, actually, that kind of the sense that once a child is in school, actually they manage really quite well, and then they come home and actually things feel totally overwhelming and they can't kind of manage that. I think it's really important that mental health leads are are kind of supported to realise how influential it can be to be able to kind of listen to families, listen to parents' experiences, and think about how mental health support teams might be able to support even if they're not seeing those difficulties in a school setting. You know, it's a difficult question for me to answer, I guess, in many respects, because I'm not the mental health lead and wouldn't have that decision making. But I would say that if your mental health lead is saying, I don't think it's appropriate, then I don't think it would be unreasonable to ask them to be having a conversation with us about the child regardless.
Yeah.
I think that that would be a reasonable thing to do, and that way we would have more of a sense of, you know, we obviously have much greater understanding of who we accept and who we don't, so perhaps that would be a way around just making sure that parental voice is heard and young person's voice is heard as well.
And I suppose we could always give you that parental voice as well from us.
Yeah.
We do have a lot of different
Nice.
services. If you know, parents get the parental voice heard. If you know, come to your ourselves, we've got this. What do you think? Sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's come up actually, which has been quite tricky, is that sometimes parents are absolutely desperate for children and young people to get support, and so they'll refer to our service and they're desperate, and then we meet the young person and the young person's like, nope, I don't want to be involved. I don't have any of these issues, or I do, but I don't want to work through them right now, or I don't even want to think about them. And, you know, just giving you that flavour then about that idea of thoughts, feelings, behaviours, physical sensations, all of that work, the homework involved, filling out all of those records, it's just not effective at all. And we do, you know, sometimes it's about offering a couple of assessment sessions. Maybe we'd offer one and then say, well, let's have another session and just see where we're at. And sometimes young people suddenly go, oh yeah, that psychoeducation is enough to click, and then things work. But actually, you know, it's about being really clear that sometimes young people just aren't ready to engage, and that it will not be effective. It's that whole, like, you can lead a horse to water stuff. And I know that I've had so many hundreds of conversations with parents over the years where it's just the most frustrating thing. But you know what, at that point, you know, we can be thinking about how can you as parents just kind of think about supporting your child, you know, how can school be involved so that when things change, and if things change, that there can be support in a timely way. But that's just another thing that's come up as well.
Yeah, I'm sure. I can see that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, I can't think of anything else. It's been so useful. Thank you, Lauren, for your time. And
my absolute pleasure.
We really appreciate it.
Thank you for all of yours as well. I know that you're doing an amazing job. I speak to so many parents that really value what you're offering. So.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear.